Welcome to Vision to Value, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on how technology is planned, purchased, and implemented in state government health and human services agencies. Each episode explores the real challenges of transformation, from procurement pitfalls to leadership strategies, and provides bold insights to drive meaningful change. Your hosts, Carol Hussey and Tony Matthews, bring decades of experience from both public and private sector leadership. Together, Carol and Tony bring unfiltered insights and straight talk on what works, what doesn't, and how agencies and vendors can turn vision into real value. Now let's get started.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Vision to Value. Today, Tony and I are going to be tackling an issue that could affect every state HHS technology initiative, the new federal funding reality, right? On February 21st, the Administration for Children and Families and CMS jointly published a press release indicating that they would no longer continue to fund the New York Integrated Eligibility System project. We'll be calling that IES for those of you that might not be familiar with that term. But this press release stated that they would no longer fund overpriced, slow-moving projects that deliver nothing for the American people, and that instead they will be focusing on cost-effective, life-saving solutions to make America healthy again. Their words. So this episode is really important because the Trump administration is clearly taking an aggressive stance on cost cutting, wasteful spending, as they're referring to it. And this New York IES rejection is proof of that. They are setting a precedent, and they are putting every state on notice. And you'll note that they refer to these types of press releases, which frankly, I've never seen a press release like that in my 20 plus years of working in this industry. And, you know, Tony and I were talking where we started dissecting this press release and all this content in there, but they're calling this communication radical transparency. So expect more of that. We're seeing that on Facebook, LinkedIn, and other channels. So, you know, if you aren't on those channels, you should get on there because we're getting a lot of really interesting communication. So with that, you know, we did want to caveat this episode by saying we are not intending in any way to cast any negative light on any state or vendor doing this work. We are just tackling this new reality that we're all living in. And we wanted to kind of jump on this in terms of our regular programming and talk about why was this funding rejected, perhaps what other states could learn from this, and then what your approach should be relative to securing funding going forward. So that's kind of where we're going to go this week. It's a little bit of like I said, a change from what we normally do. But with that, Tony, let's just talk about this. So the rejection came out. They denied the request for $30.2 million in additional funding for this IES project that had been going on for some number of years. And they cited minimal progress since 2016, lack of completed modules, and that, you know, it was not in alignment with the new administration's priorities of transparency, efficiency, cost effectiveness, et cetera. So what does this signal to other states, Tony?
Well, before we get into that, Carol, I just want to say the other caveat, besides not casting blame on anyone, is there are a lot of things that we all know happened behind the scenes that weren't covered in the press release. So it could be a failure on the state's part to not have communicated well with their federal partners to let them know why there were delays. It could be that they did an outstanding job and their federal partners prior to the administration change were on board with what they were doing, and the new administration's not. So I want to make sure that as we go through this conversation, we are speculating in a big way as to it could have been this, it could have been that. Here are sort of the cautionary tales of what you can do going forward to make sure you don't get in that position. But I just want to be clear, you know, having been on the other side of it, there's always more to it than what is publicly sort of broadcast or conveyed. And so I want to make sure that people know we're going to be speculating. You know, it could have been this, it could have been that. Make sure you do this, make sure you don't do that. and all of it is with very little insight as to how things really went for the
Mhm.
8 or 9 years of this project.
Yep. No, fair point. Glad you pointed that
So,
out. Yeah.
but I think at the end of the day, you know, there are processes that have to be followed to get federal funding, right? You've got to do all of your APD type, documentation and APUDs and all of that stuff. And so I think the nature of that is supposed to be sort of a clear framework and timeline for what you want to accomplish in what timeline, what the outcome is going to be, how it's going to benefit the people that you're serving. And hopefully you've been in conjunction with your federal partners all along the way to where if there is a competing priority and this gets up, we've got to solve this other piece before we can keep traction on the project. They're like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Clean your data up before you can have a good interface, right? And then a year and a half later, your vendor finds something else. There's a security issue. We better fix the security issue before we can start letting people apply online with the new system. So I do think there are instances where if you're in lockstep with your federal partners, you shouldn't have any aha moments where, hey, it's been 8 years. This is supposed to be done in 3. We're not giving you any more money. We should, for 121 million, we should already have something deliverable. But that could have all happened, and then you get new leadership at the federal level that says, "I don't care what my predecessor said. We gave you 121 million. It was supposed to be 90. We gave you 121. We're not giving you 30 million more." And
Hmm.
so I think that's the other piece of it too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, these big, slow-moving projects are certainly in the crosshairs of this administration, right? They have an agenda to cut costs, and the bigger the bucket of money, the quicker they get to the number they're trying to hit, right? And so, the federal funding decisions, like it or not, are really politically charged. And
Mhm.
regardless, to your point of what the past was, we're in a different place. And so previously, when you were doing your annual APD update, you could kind of copy and paste and add some new things or, whatever, modify. It's no longer a given that you're going to get that money. So even if they said at the beginning of this 5-year project, oh, yeah, that roadmap looks great, you can't just expect that you're going to get it. And so, hopefully, we're going to share with you today some things that you should be doing as you're putting together or preparing to put together that APDU for next time or your new IAPD to embark on a new journey. Like, you need to be thinking about this in a different way now, right?
Sure. Well, and I think the other thing too is I think a lot of times, especially in health and human service agencies, you're not thinking as politically as maybe other agencies do, whether it's economic development or something like that. Um, it's a more political environment now, and I think you've got to have the sort of self awareness to know: are you in a state that has a large sanctuary city that the current administration doesn't see favorably and the previous administration did? Know whether or not you may be a target. It could have nothing to do with your project. It could have something to do with your state's politics. And there's a target on your back because they're trying to set an example and set a tone. So I think part of this exercise too is sort of having that sort of self reflection to know whether or not you're likely to be really held to the fire for things that really don't really directly affect you. You've got to be more circumspect than that and sort of appreciate sort of the political environment.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's the reality we live in today.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
Definitely. And I do think there were some clues in this press release that we can sort of, pick out. You and I both very clearly, carefully read this and analyzed it. And like you said, based on the surface level information that was available to us, we didn't go off and interview people and get backstories or anything like that. But clearly they said, you didn't make enough progress, right? You've already spent a lot of money, and so we're seeing that based on what was spent and what was delivered, that's not lining up. The interesting thing I saw in there too was that they talked about no real outcomes. um,
Mhm.
and, for me, that lines up with a lot of the things that we've talked about a lot over these episodes that we've been creating, which is know your data, right? So if I'm going to go back to the well and ask for more money, I better have some data to back up what I've done to demonstrate a return on the investment they have already made,
That's right.
because that's a predictor of future progress. And so I should be able to do that. I should have those numbers in place.
Absolutely. And I think, there's an accountability element to this that sometimes is ugly, but it's not necessarily unfair. And if you've had a lot of churn and there's been a lot of movement but no progress, I think that's the statement that was made here was, look, you've done some stuff, but you really haven't moved the ball very far down the field for $121 million over 8 years. You know, what's the problem? Like,
Yeah.
I think the accountability, sometimes it's easy to get defensive about when you're feeling insecure, like you
Mhm.
should have made more progress than you did. Um, but that's the reality of it, is you're being held accountable for what the expectation was.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the money comes with strings, right? You're not getting this. There's an expectation. You've made a commitment in your APD, and they're giving you the money in good faith, and they want to see that demonstration. And so, proving progress is also something that shouldn't just happen at the time that you are going back to the well. You should be proving progress over time, and that comes not just through project deliverables and schedule milestones, but through measurable outcomes, right? And so when we say that, we want to, like, are you saving money? Are you saving time? Are you more compliant? Have you improved your outcomes for the people you are serving? These are the kind of measurements that they are looking to see. And frankly, we don't see a lot of those kinds of KPIs built into RFPs for large transformation projects.
That's right.
So,
Yeah. No, that's right. And it's funny, as we talked about this, a lot of the episodes we've had of this podcast before now sort of all feed into this issue, ironically. Whether it's having consistent executive leadership, and ownership of major projects, whether it's how you procure things, making sure you've got a partner, not just a vendor, right? And making sure you're writing those outcomes into your contracts. Um, Change management, right? Making sure that your staff is on board with sort of the progress you need to make and the time period you need to make it based on the commitments you've made to your federal funding partners. I think there's an element too that with your IT shop, I know for a fact that there's a finite number of resources in IT to do all the projects that any department wants to do. I'm sure this was very high on their list for a while. And then a couple years in, other things became a higher priority probably than this project. And again, I'm speculating. And so IT can't just hire, and state government can't just hire another 25 programmers or coders or project managers because you've inserted five high priority projects ahead of this one. And so I suspect there could have been a potential where, as the funding was secured, and okay, we've got the money we need, we've got some time to sort of stand this up. This is more important. That's more important. This is more important. I think this may have got pushed down the line to
mhm,
where, and then somebody new takes over the department, and they have their own priorities and mandates that they have to accomplish. And so I see where there's a potential, and again, we don't know all the details, but there's a potential where this just got pushed down the line because the funding was secured, and they felt like they were making some degree of progress, and so they thought they were okay, possibly.
mhm.
Um, and so I think all those other things we talked about have to be lined up to make sure that you successfully deliver these large, transformative IT projects.
Mhm. Yeah, and I always think about too, like, as those new priorities come in and you're pushing the can down the road for these other things, is there somebody that's saying, "Hold up, here's the risk of doing that. Here are the implications," and leadership, which we talk about every week,
Mhm.
are they involved in these decisions? Do they understand the ramifications of disrupting your roadmap? and particularly from a federal funding perspective, because states rely on these funds to be able to continue to modernize their systems. It's a huge element of being able to make that kind of progress.
Absolutely. And like we talked about with Wayne, on one of our podcasts, there's a lot of heads involved in the leadership of these projects. It's executive leadership, it's your CIO, it's your budget person, it's your program people, HR. I mean, there's a lot of different people, and there's going to be turnover.
Mm-hmm.
And if the person that sort of is driving this is a person that sort of moves out, they retire, they take another position somewhere else, and they were the one keeping it on track, if the other leaders involved weren't on board with the timetable and the priority and the urgency of it, then when that one leader leaves and they were the ones driving it, you run the risk of the urgency sort of goes away and
Mm-hmm.
other things become more important. So again, sort of circling back to topics we've already discussed, it's not just leadership, it's sort of a cohesive leadership where that's why it's important that that chief executive is in the room sort of on those monthly meetings to make sure that the progress is being made, that they understand the hiccups and what resources are needed to keep it moving and what the consequences are of failing to deliver. And I
Mm-hmm.
think if you're just popping in for 5 minutes to show your face and then you're taking a call, then you wouldn't see that this ball is being dropped
Yeah.
and that you're putting the department at risk.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's not leadership. And the thing too, in terms of the roadmap and the strategy and all of that, it's hard to have a project timeline that is 5 or 6 or 7 years anyway, right? Because most of the people that are in the leadership positions at that time aren't going to be there for the duration of that project, right? We know that. I mean, minimally every 4 years, you may have some turnover at the executive level, for appointed positions and things, but you also have, what is the average turnover for CIO in a state is like 2.5 years or something like
Mhm.
that. So as a leader, I want to think about what can I get done in the time that I'm going to be here? What can I commit to? And what can I look, how do I demonstrate progress? And so it's hard for me to think, well, about something that's going to happen well after I'm gone, because then I'm not the one in charge of it. I'm not the one controlling it and making sure it's happening. Or the next person's vision, as you said earlier, is going to be different than mine. So I think all of these things are really, we've seen a lot of really big, hairy projects and failures and newspaper articles and all the things. I think everything that's happening right now really lends itself for us to kind of shift again. But years ago, we were all doing incremental modernization to bring back an old term, right? Maybe we need to go back there, right? Because one of the things that they pointed out in that press release was that there were only 2 modules implemented in 9 years. That is clearly not going to fly anymore. But if I said in the next year, I'm going to implement this module and I'm getting approval for that, and I get that done, and then I do the next thing, you know, I will say doing it that way typically takes longer in the whole term, right, of the project. You're going to extend your project longer when you do it this way. It's also harder to sunset a legacy system in a modular way. So like I understand why we do these big bang things. I get
Mhm.
it. But we're working in a different environment now. So if we were to say we're going to rethink our roadmap, we're going to do things in a little different way, we're going to get more modular, or for lack of, not even modular, maybe we're going to do a whole new data architecture layer or something like that that then lends itself to something else. Like we need to chunk it up so that we lower risk, we lower the initial, out financial, like we're deferring costs, of course, but like whatever that outlay is now, and we're demonstrating that process along the way. We have to focus on showing progress in smaller deliverable components, as opposed to saying, well, yeah, we're going to get to that, or yeah, that's next year. Like, what have you done this year? Show me.
Yeah, and I think that circles back to what we talked about one episode of sort of stop at the beginning and think through what you want to do, and I think that drives your how you procure and who you hire and all that sort of thing. But we were lucky. We had a CIO from the private sector that was like, look, it's a 4-year modernization transformation project. But as we get things completed along the way, we're going to deliver those. So it wasn't like they weren't like stopping points. They were more like milestones along the way. When the data is cleaned up, we're going to allow people to leverage that tool and drive reports from that, do predictive analytics and that sort of thing with the data that's cleaned up. On our way toward something, integrated eligibility, and then when that component is completed, we'll leverage that and we'll start using the integrated eligibility piece, and then that's on our roadmap to where we want to be in 4 years, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
do think, yeah, I mean, you could say it's modular, you could say it's sort of, incremental sort of progress, however you want to frame it. But you've got to know at the beginning, and that's how you draft your contracts with your vendors, right? Or your partners, is okay, we want to be able to, as things are completed that we need sequentially completed along the way to our goal, we want to be able to deliver these to either our customers or our employees, so we have something to show for it, and we're getting value along the way. It's not just this, in 4 years we'll have this magic solution that'll solve all our problems. We all know by now, hopefully, that never works, or rarely works. So I think, but if you don't think about that at the beginning, Carol, then you're not structuring your RFPs looking for that, right? You don't have
Yeah.
vendors that are bidding on that sort of delivery schedule because you just said in 4 years I want this.
Yeah.
And then you can't bait and switch them and say, well, in 12 months I want to see this piece done, in 24 months I want to see that piece done. That's not what we bid on.
Right.
So I do think you've got to have the wherewithal to sort of circle the wagons, get all the key players involved at the beginning, and have this strategy on the front end, and that's going to make this a lot more seamless with your private sector partners than if you try to go this route after you've already hired someone.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And, I want to kind of go off on that a little bit, because one of the things that we talked about in our procurement episode, and I was just at an event last week talking to another vendor about a project that they were working on in a state, and all to remain nameless. But the one thing they were talking about is how many deliverables were in their contract. So they were spending a ton of time, which equals money, on creating these documents, right? So the project was very document deliverable heavy. And, just for our state audience members, those documents are typically written by some of the highest level people on the project team, which means their hourly rate is high. And because they're contractual requirements, right? By contract, you have requested these deliverables. So a lot of time and effort goes into making those deliverables amazing, because that's what you bought from them.
Right.
Yes, you bought a system, but you also bought these documents. And so when you're thinking about deliverables and, managing your contract, think about, am I buying documents or am I buying a system? So if you're thinking about your project and, how you're going to manage your money more efficiently, and you're developing that roadmap and you're thinking about incremental return on the investment, do think about that, because I I worked on a project years ago in another state, and we did an analysis of their systems delivery lifecycle. Just to create the documents on that project, it would have been 10 months of labor hours. It was a 4-year project, I think. 10 months just in document creation. And what do you do with those documents? Why are they valuable to you? So I say that to go back, on your comment about the RFP, Tony, and the roadmap, and what you're buying.
Right.
That's really important to think about.
Well, I think what happens in state and local government is we overcorrect. And I think what happens is very easy to do. We've all done it. I'm guilty of it myself. Where you got burned, right? You had a $13 million project that crashed and burned, and you didn't have a good vendor, right? And the legislature's mad because $13 million later it doesn't work, and you got to sort of regroup and start over. And so, doggone it, that's not going to happen to me next time. I'm going to make sure they document this and they're going to document that. And I'm not going to get bit by the same thing again.
Yeah.
And then you overcompensate and you want all this documentation and all this proof, and you don't realize that there's a cost associated with that. It's no different than states that get burned, and in the next contract, they think they want unlimited liability. Which, sure, if you can get it, great. You think somebody's going to bid on an unlimited liability $100 million IT project without offsetting that by adjusting their rates?
Yeah.
So you want good, affordable bids, but you also think you're going to get unlimited liability for no extra cost?
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. So I think it's all about balance. I know that in state government, we want to sort of make sure that it's an equal playing field and we can rate everybody the same. And that way there's nobody can contest the procurement. But that sort of stifles innovation, right? If you just say, hey, here's my problem, I've defined it, what my problem is, what I'd like to solve for, and let people sort of bid on what they think a solution would be, more innovation, but you're opening yourself up to potential challenges because you're not comparing apples to apples. So I think that's the biggest challenge right now in state and local government is the way you procure is going to drive sort of what you get. Do you want to be super conservative, very low risk, a lot of documentation, a lot of liability absorbed by the vendor? It's going to cost you a lot more money and resources to do all that. Or you could be more innovative and have more innovation and be more open to sort of ideas, but that's going to put you at risk of somebody challenging a procurement award because they thought their solution was better than the one that was awarded.
Yeah.
And I think that's the conundrum that state and local governments are finding themselves in today.
Yeah. And just so you know, like, we're not going down a procurement rabbit hole here. It may sound like that, but kind of circling back around, the reason all of this is so important is it goes back to that ROI. What did I buy with that? Let's just say I'm spending, for easy math, 10 million a year over 5 years. If I'm spending 10 million in that first year and I've spent it developing a whole bunch of documents, but I haven't delivered anything, that might not be viewed positively by your federal funding partners. So that's why it's important to think about this in advance of bringing your vendor in, because you're building a business case now in a different way than you used to build your business case before. We talked about having your data. We talked about the measurements, right? Cost savings, efficiency, outcomes, all those things. And then another area that kind of we haven't touched on is showing it's really important. Let's just assume that we're going to start to see a lot more rejections. The other thing you need to think about in your business case is you're going to need to demonstrate how not getting funding is going to negatively impact your service delivery. If I don't get this money, what's going to happen? That's more important than I might get, I might be able to do some things if I get the money, but why should they fund you? Like, building that case, I think, is just as important now, or more important now than ever.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more. Nothing to add on that one.
Yeah. So I think that goes back to just strengthening that relationship, right? The conversations with your federal funding partners, CMS, ACF, and the other agencies, FNS, whoever you're working with. Those regular conversations become very important. There's certainly a communication pause with the vendor community, from what I'm hearing. But your federal partners and your regional reps should still be talking to you, still be supporting you. Make sure that you're having those conversations with them. They should not be seeing your APD for the first time when you submit it for approval. That nothing in that document should be a surprise to them. So make sure that you're getting their input about the information that you are providing to them, so it sets you up for a smoother review and approval process.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And I think the other piece of this too is we talked about the turnover, especially with the technical people, right? I don't know how many incoming CIOs, there's so many things they have to do when they hit the ground. I don't know how many incoming CIOs are reviewing the APD for the major projects so they know what the commitment was in the time frame. What are the expectations from our federal partners to know what we've committed to, so they
Mhm.
know where to put that sort of in the urgency scale, right? So
Yeah.
I think another sort of tweak that state and local governments might be able to make is maybe one of the first things you do is, if you have a major project like one of these, you sort of require that this incoming CIO has reviewed those and has made a determination. Are we on track? Is it red, yellow, green? If it's not green, what do you think the hiccups are? And make sure that you're seamless with the handoff from the previous CIO to the next one. I
Mhm.
think that would be beneficial as well.
Yeah. And maybe there are some ways to rethink your roadmap. Maybe you previously said, "Oh, we're not going to get anything until year 4," but maybe there are some things, some quick wins that you could get that demonstrate that now. So if you do need to change your roadmap, demonstrate why, right? Like the fact that you want to get that early ROI and that you are looking to save money or whatever those KPIs are that we mentioned.
Yeah, and let's be honest. We talked about not letting perfect get in the way of good, and sometimes those sort of quick wins are detrimental to sort of making the incremental progress you need. But let's just be honest. Sometimes you need a quick win.
Yeah.
It's a new commissioner or chief executive. It's a new CIO, and yep, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have sort of put all of our effort into getting a quick win because it's more practical to do it sort of the longer way. But the reality is sometimes you need a quick win to sort of show the legislature, your federal partners, your stakeholders that you're actually delivering things, and it's not just everything is going to be 2 years down
Yeah.
the road. So I think that's another sort of reality check that folks need to have, is sometimes there's the optimal way to do things, and then there's the pragmatic way to do things. And sometimes a quick win is more pragmatic than the more practical way to do it.
Yeah. So all that being said, like we've given you some real, I think, tactical things you can be doing to shore up your future APDU or APD and kind of try to get your ducks in a row. But obviously, the new administration is looking at making some major cuts, and we're seeing that already. So, worst case scenario, if your funding gets cut, what are you going to do? And you're going to have to kind of be preparing for that, and maybe it's not an all or nothing. Maybe they don't cut the whole thing, but maybe it's significantly reduced, right? So then you're going to have to start to think about, okay, what's my plan B to either scale back my modernization strategy or to secure alternative funding. So what would you do, Tony, if you were thinking like developing your plan B? What would that look like?
Well, I think the first thing I would do is sort of take an inventory. Where are we, right? If I didn't already know sort of where we were, red, yellow, green, I would have my team together today and say, hey, we've got to figure out now, where are we? Are we on track? How are we tracking against what we've committed to? So I think that's the first thing, right? Is sort of knowing where you are. If you're green, you probably don't have anything to worry about, right? But if you're red, you know that, oof, if they keep knocking on my door tomorrow, what am I going to tell them? So I think that's the first thing I would do. Second thing I would do is know whether or not I'm in a red state or a blue state, and know whether or not I'm more likely or less likely to have my feet held to the fire. I think that's something that's just sort of self-awareness. You sort of need to know whether you're first or last on the chopping block. So I think that's something just realistically you need to understand, sort of your place in the political world. And I think the third thing is sort of reinforcing the things that we talked about previously, whether it's cohesive leadership, whether IT is on track with what you're trying to accomplish. Not just your department's IT shop, but if you have to interact with the central IT shop, are they on board with what you're trying to do? Can they help defend you if you need defending, or support you if you need to sort of move the needle? I think it's just a matter of circle the wagons, all the things that we've talked about up to this point, and just sort of regroup and make sure that we're on good footing with our federal partners, especially these big projects,
Yeah.
tens of millions of dollars. I know the interface you're working on for the the one internet or website for all the state government is a big priority for your governor. I get that, and that's going to be important to you as well. But if you're going to lose $30 million because you're not meeting your federal commitments, you're going to have to sort of navigate that and make sure that you're prioritizing correctly.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, as we've been talking about, there's a lot of change. There's a lot of sort of new way of thinking, new priorities, all of that. And you know, getting ahead of that is the key to it all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Federal funding is never guaranteed. But right now it's even more at risk. And certainly, in follow up to the massive amounts of funding that became available, during and post COVID. So states are just going to have to prove their value, efficiency, and results.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't wait to figure that out after they come knocking on your door. So just being proactive and preparing for that, as we mentioned, is critical to protecting whatever funding that you're going to need to move forward. But Tony, any final takeaways as we close out for today?
Yeah, just one more. I sort of left out the fact that one of your first stops needs to be sort of to meet with your vendor or vendors, right? Whoever your partner is, your big SI implementer, they've got some skin in this game too. The last thing they want is to have a major fail on their hands either, because they want to point to your project to get the next project and say, go talk to this state because we helped them successfully, yada yada yada. So I do think sort of the missing piece that I didn't mention earlier was you probably need to start with them because they've got some skin in this game too, and they want you to be as successful as you want to be because it affects them directly as well.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. We didn't touch on it today, but I just one final note too is like look across the programs within your enterprise, right? Like talk to your peers in other programs. Is there some way to gain some economy of scale to leverage funds from other areas? And just maybe this is going to be like the catalyst for interoperability and cross programmatic service delivery. That'd be great, wouldn't it? Silver lining. So anyway, that's kind of all we have for today. We again, no knock against any vendors or states. We're just trying to help everybody out there. And as usual, I'll offer if you want to call and talk with Tony and I, we're always here to provide some thoughts and to share with us what you're doing. What are your agencies doing now to secure and protect your federal funding? So feel free to engage and share your insights with us either on YouTube or LinkedIn. If you subscribe to Vision to Value on YouTube, you'll get notifications of upcoming episodes. We do post it on LinkedIn, but sometimes people aren't on there every day and they might miss it. So subscribing to YouTube's the best way to make sure you're getting those notifications. And as always, we're just really grateful that you've tuned in and hope you're finding value in this. If you have new topics you want to hear, let us know that. And we'll see you next time on Vision to Value.